Alright. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to KUAW Radio. You are live here with Dr. Karasay with Up Close and Cultural with Dr. Karasay. Our special guest today is Senator Cindy Holscher with the state of Kansas with District 8. We will be talking today about several issues concerning our community. So I want you to take a moment and make sure that you are liking and commenting and sharing all of the content with KUAW Radio across all of the social media platforms that you can see streaming behind me. You will find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, and you can also find us on KUAW.org. The phone number is there as well if you would like to call in. As always, if you have any other questions, comments, and concerns, please feel free to email me at Dr. Harisha at Better Days Counseling and LifeCoaching.com. You can also contact the radio station as well. You can also send us messages on YouTube where we are streaming live there as well. So with that being said, we have a lot to talk about today. And again, this is only an hour show. So we are going to pack as much in as we can. This is definitely going to be, it's going to be an informative show, but a fluid conversation that doesn't stop. We're going to be providing information that would start a conversation, definitely not an end to a conversation, but definitely to start a thought-provoking conversation to get to a point to where we can give information about what happens in our government and in our legislature, and then also how we can get the community to engage in what is going on in the government, and then how we can be proactive. A lot of times when things happen in the government and in the world around us, we tend to feel helpless, or we tend to think that our vote doesn't count, or we think that we don't have a part to play. And that is absolutely not true. Or there are conversations that I have with a lot of people where the narrative is fun, where things are left or right, or they're black or white. And sure enough, we do live in a society where those things do matter. However, they are not the end all be all. Everyone has a part to play. And if you do not show up, if you are not present, if you are not involved in the process, then one, you are not there to play any part. You have already dismissed your part. You've dismissed yourself in whatever part there is for you to play. And some things aren't partisan, such as the safety of our children. Some things aren't partisan, such as having food to eat. Some things aren't partisan, such as our mental health and having access to all of those things, including education. All of those things were addressed, along with others, were addressed in the legislature this year, and there were some important bills that were passed. And people have had conversations about them, and they have questions about them. And that is why we have our guest today. Senator Holscher is again, with the Kansas State legislature. She is a senator with District 8 here in the state of Kansas. And I will let her, that's just a brief introduction with her, and I will let her introduce herself, and we will do a brief dive into a few topics and kind of let this thing flow the way it goes. But right now, Senator Holscher, welcome to Up Close and Culture with Dr. Karasay. Thank you for coming on to the show today. But will you please introduce yourself to our guests?
Thank you so much, Dr. Karasay, and thank you for the work you do. Thank you for having me on as a guest so we can talk about what did and didn't happen in the legislature and what we can do moving forward, because as you alluded to, we all have a part to play in this. So I'm anxious to talk about how people can get involved and make a difference, because what happens in the state legislature, it truly impacts your day-to-day life, your taxes, your roads, your schools. So many decisions are being made there. And I know often people don't really pay much attention to what's going on in Topeka, but like I said, it truly impacts your day-to-day life. So I'm anxious to talk about some of those different areas. And I started out, just a little bit of background. I first entered the legislature in 2017. I had been volunteering in our schools prior to that point and had noticed that things weren't going real well. We were losing teachers, supplies were scarce, and come to find out, the person who was representing me at that time in the House was one of the main people working to defund our schools. So decided to run against her, won that race and stayed in the House for 2 terms and then ran for Senate. And so that's where I am now.
Oh, awesome. And that's where it starts. It's good to know that you have that background as an educator. I know a lot of the people on my page are people in my family. I come from a background of educators. I actually was homeschooled. My grandmother owned her own school. And wow. By the time I got into public school, and the reason that I actually went to public school is because she fell ill and we actually didn't have a choice. I didn't have a choice at the time. But there are also a lot of teachers who are actually on my Facebook page, and I know that they're tuning in as well. But
and let me elaborate. I was a volunteer at the time when I ran for office. Prior to that, a long time ago, before I had kids and everything, I actually worked at Sprint and oversaw part of the operations there. And when my kids were little, stayed home for a few years to be with them. And then once they were in school, I started volunteering like at their local schools, their elementary school. And like I said, that's where I saw some of the impact of the cuts that were being made by the Brownback administration. And it was very concerning. And so, like I said, from there, that's when I found out that it was my own legislator who was doing a lot of that, pushing up the very bad legislation that was leading to some of those cuts. But like I said, that was some great experience for me to see real world what happens in our schools. And then this past session on our break in April, every year I go volunteer in our schools because I just think it's important that we know what is going on there. I actually issued a challenge to all of my peers in the legislature to go volunteer for a day or two. Sadly, I only think about 4 of us did it.
Mm-hmm. Right, absolutely. You find out a lot when you actually go into the school system and see what our teachers have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. But to your point, you being a volunteer in the school system and working at Sprint goes to my point earlier that you are in the position that you're in, coming from a background of a person in the community that we see every day. So you making the huge difference that you make now, you come from a background just as the same as the people who are watching right now.
Absolutely.
So if you see a state senator across from the screen from me right now, the people who are watching are just can feel just as empowered to get involved and make as huge of a difference from where they are. Just as you did, starting from where you did, you in the school system as a volunteer decided this is something that I see needs to be different. So I'm deciding that just from where I am as a school volunteer and a mom and a parent, that I'm going to make a difference.
Absolutely.
So, with that being said, there was some changes in the legislature this year that was made regarding the school system and enrollment in the school system. Some people have been calling it Kansas has an open school now. So can you go in a little bit of detail now and explain that?
And there's different names floating around out there: open enrollment, open borders, as far as what this system is. And just to back up and give a little bit of background on the whole issue, most of our districts now do have some open enrollment processes. So, like, for instance, my kids, Olathe East is our actual neighborhood high school. Out of 3 kids, only one of my kids is going to Olathe East, because we do have an open process where if you want to go to a different high school, there's different programs, that type of thing, you can do that. And each of our districts around here typically does have some type of process if you want to go to a different school within the district. And there is some inter-district exchange too, as far as children that live in one area go to a different district. And so there are provisions already to allow those types of things to happen. Typically, people don't necessarily pursue them. But what this was done is this was positioned as a way to help people who maybe are at a school that's been struggling. And I will say, we don't see equal schools out there in the respect that sometimes property tax plays a difference, bond issues play a difference, and the investments made in schools. So what this was done was kind of put out there as a shiny object to say, okay, well, now a kid can go anywhere in the state that they want and get the education that they want, even if they don't live in that district. It's packaged and wrapped that way to, like I said, look like it's a good thing. But really what this is this is a program that is designed to create chaos for our schools and undermine our public school system. Something similar has been done in other states, in particular in Minnesota. And what this does, sadly, is it creates a 2-tier system. Because what you find out is that the families who have the means are able to maybe drive their kids 45 minutes or an hour away to go to, quote, that better school. But then you have a large number, the bulk of people who have to work or don't have the means as far as the transportation to take their kids to that other school. So then what happens is you get a group of kids who leave the school, and then you have kind of the left behind. And what that does then is that takes some of the investments that would be made into that particular local school, takes those investments with them. And that's a huge issue. I mean, and it's not just a huge issue in, some of our suburban areas. This is a program too that it could end up destroying our rural schools as well. Because if you lose your schools and your small neighborhood schools in these small towns that are already hanging by a thread, they've already lost their local businesses, their mom and pop shops. They've already lost their hospitals and doctors, and then they lose their schools. Then those little communities are done. But I would tell you, in the more urban areas, what we see these programs do, again, is it creates a system of haves and have-nots. It creates a 2-tier system. It's white flight is what it is. And it bothers me so much that as the free state, Kansas, that this is what the legislature, and there's a very distinct faction that's pushing these bills, that this is what they brought forward and stuck into the funding bill as a provision. And again, like I said, it's packaged in a way to make it sound enticing, but it just creates chaos. It drives white flight. The other thing is, you hear some parents say things like, well, my kid has special needs, and our school district doesn't have the tools or the things that we need to get what my child needs. So they think they'll go to a different district and get that. But here's the deal. All of our districts are struggling because special ed hasn't been funded where it needs to be. And on top of that, we have a teacher shortage. Right now we are short, I think it's about 1,300. We have about 1,300 vacancies, teacher vacancies across the state. Additionally, we have about another 350 special ed teacher vacancies across the state. So moving from one district to another doesn't magically mean that the services are going to be there. And again, we're all kind of in the same boat as far as having a shortage of teachers, having a shortage of the funding that is needed, and having a shortage of just general funding and all. Because the way the funding formula works is that there is an obligation that we do fund special ed.
Mm-hmm.
But if we don't get the funding in the other areas, that hurts our schools overall. So like I said, that is one provision, that open borders, that has been packaged a certain way to make it sound enticing, but really it's just another way to try to bring the collapse of our public schools.
Right. And then when the funding, just so that they get our audience gets a clear understanding, when schools are underfunded, particularly in the rural areas, when our schools start to lose funding and the rural communities do not have the money for the children to attend school, and the schools can potentially shut down as a result of this, correct? Then not only do we have, because most of the time, if I'm correct, these rural areas have families who are marginalized and not of higher income.
Right.
So as a result of that, these families who are already facing their own, they already have these mounted responsibilities. They are now going to be faced with having to transport their children to other schools.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, we already know that when it comes to marginalized populations, our schools are tasked with the responsibility of feeding a lot of these families.
Absolutely.
So then there's that burden, that additional burden as well. So there's this trickle down effect that happens, when these things occur. So there are a lot of things that happen when these bills pass. It affects the entire community. So it's more than just about being able to enroll in another school. You have to think about what happens when everyone tries to enroll in this school. What happens when this other school, when the people leave the school over here? And then what happens in the sports arena?
Mm-hmm. Oh, and that's an excellent point, because under this provision, you can definitely have schools recruiting athletes.
Mm-hmm.
And, what does that mean to, a family that has been in a particular school and, they've got a kiddo that's, maybe worked toward becoming, the quarterback on the football team or what have you. I mean, that could all change.
Right.
Additionally, too, here's something else to think about that's in that provision. So let's say a kiddo goes out of district, comes to this district here where I am. And then let's say that they're enrolled in school and maybe they're a second grader. Once they're enrolled, they are there basically until the end if they want. Now, if they decide they want to go somewhere else, there's a process for that. But essentially, once they're in, they're in. So let's say then that school is at capacity. If a new family moves in, and let's say they're just even 2 doors down from the school, but that school's full, the kids that live right there 2 doors down have to find a different school.
Wow.
And I don't know that a lot of people realize that provision is there.
So no, I don't think they do. So basically what you're saying is that when you move into a community now in the state of Kansas, it is not guaranteed that because you move into a community that your child will be able to enroll in that school system.
That's right. Now this all starts. This all starts in 2024. So we have a little bit of time here. And that's why it is so important for people to get involved now. If they've never, ever been involved, wow, is this the time to make sure they're involved? Because it starts in 2024. So the fact of the matter is the legislature talks about our schools every year. And, new provisions can be drawn up. So it is imperative we get some new people in to take this focus off destroying our schools, because like this particular provision with the open borders, that's just one of the things they stuck in there to try to make life more difficult for our public schools. Another one was there's another set of, I believe, criteria or evaluation that's done that was stuck into the funding bill. And what they did is they set the criteria higher than pretty much every other state in the country. Because what they want to do is this faction that's been working to destroy our public schools, they like to push the narrative that our schools are failing. So what they do is they get the legislature to put in these parameters that are way too high. And then when we can't attain them, then they said, see, they were supposed to do this, and this, and they didn't. Well, it's because they've set these artificial parameters so high that they know we're not going to attain them. So then that allows them to, go forward with that narrative of our schools are failing. And the heart of the matter is they're not. I mean, we have award-winning schools in our state, not just in Johnson County, across the state. And, I visit schools not just right here close to me, but I visit other schools. We have dedicated teachers working hard every day and staff people working hard every day to make a difference in the lives of their kids. So it's so disheartening that we have a legislature that really is not reflective of the people, because ultimately, they've got these provisions that they've put out there in the funding plan. Every year they're pushing vouchers. And what they want to do is they want these vouchers to be able to allow children to go to private schools or even homeschooling and have the taxpayer dollars go with the kid. Well, we have separation of church and state, for one thing, that says we're not supposed to do that. Additionally, public funds are supposed to go to public schools. But this is another thing, too, that is so concerning in the respect that, if they are successful with this whole plan of collapsing our public schools, and there's this drive to privatization, I mean, there's 80 counties out there that don't even have a private school. So kind of to your point earlier, when their local public school is gone, what's going to happen in those areas too? And again, you're talking about often marginalized people that live in poverty, that it's difficult to move somewhere else. So, like I said, that's a big concern, because there are areas all across our state that would not have an education option without our public schools. So I don't know that a lot of people think about that too, that, sometimes that carrot is dangled out there like, oh, Kansas has these great private schools. And, if your kid can't go to public school, they just go to private school. Well, the heart of the matter is our public schools are awesome. And then when you look at the bare facts, again, that we don't have private schools everywhere across the state. And in some areas, it's a religious school. Not everybody wants to go to a religious school. So it's a huge concern as far as, what this potential collapse will mean for the whole state. I mean, it's a huge concern in urban areas, suburban areas, and rural areas. It's frightening, honestly, because when you think about Kansas in particular, one of the main reasons people move here is for the schools.
Right.
And then if the schools are gone, then people likely will look moving to other communities. I think about businesses like Garmin, and I think about other industries that are here in the area that have attracted people. And I think about Gardner, that has had a huge buildup over the past few years of industry and technology. A lot of those companies looked at our schools and said, yeah, this is going to be a good place for us to be. What happens then? And doctors and nurses and so many people, like I said, are here for great schools. If the schools collapse, we lose a lot of that intellectual ability that's been fueling our economy. And that's a huge concern too.
Right, absolutely. And I will say, say this, so we can move on. When you, uh, when, because the headline that is out there is that our schools are failing, that puts the onus on our teachers, and it says
Yes.
that our teachers are bad. And I will say that thankfully that legislatures like you and Senator Haley and Senator Foster, you guys are pro-teacher, and you guys do not feel that way. You guys absolutely do support the teachers of Kansas, and I have personally seen you guys with my own eyes and heard you with my own ears at the legislature support the teachers and try to defend them in every way you can throughout this entire process. And so you can't at one point say that the schools are failing and then in the same breath do things to not fund them to make them better.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And
Right.
yeah, I mean, I have the utmost respect for our teachers and staff that are showing up every day despite the fact that the legislature does some really concerning things to our public schools. And like I said, and because there's a faction there that has this desire to make them collapse. So like I said, I just have so much respect for our teachers who are so dedicated to our students and keep showing up every day.
Absolutely. That's why it is so important that with the elections coming up in November, that you get to know the platforms of the people who are running and you get behind them and you support them. So we talked a little bit about these families, which now is not just the marginalized families, even though they are being hit harder, who can possibly be affected by food shortages now, and things that could be affected down the line if this in 2024 when this comes into play. But one thing that did come out, even though the food tax was not completely eliminated, there has been a bill that was passed to where it will eventually go down. So can you talk about the bill that Governor Kelly signed that will eventually eliminate the food tax? If we could talk about that for a moment.
Yeah, no, great. Yeah, that was a push that came, we started prior to session to eliminate the sales tax on food. The governor's plan was to totally eliminate it starting in July of this year. And with the revenue that's been coming in, that was very doable. Because Governor Kelly, as well as Lieutenant Governor Tolan, have done a lot to bring investment to Kansas and bring jobs. So our economy has done very well, despite a pandemic and despite a legislature often working against it. So we've been doing well in the respect, like I said, of a revenue surplus. So we knew that the money was there to be able to do this, to eliminate the sales tax on food. And, a number of us were making that push all throughout session. And ultimately, we ended up with a phase-in approach. And again, it's another area that's very disheartening because the reason that we weren't able to go ahead and get the full elimination is because leadership, the extremist leadership, said that they didn't want to give the governor a win. Mm-hmm. And we're talking about people, though. We're talking about the fact that of about $500 a year, this could have made a difference for families. Who have to purchase food for their kids, and at a time when our revenue is as strong as it is, this is something that should have been done. And again, it should have been starting in July. To make us wait until January after the election. And like I said, I mean, they weren't shy about it. They said, well, we don't want to give the governor a win. Mm-hmm. And that, like I said, that was just very disheartening to know that that's exactly why they made it a staggered approach, a phase-in approach. Because like I said, the governor, all of us as Democrats, a few moderate Republicans, we were very much ready to have it start now because we could. And, you know, there's another area too that got a lot of attention to kind of backtrack in regard to schools. There were a few votes in regard to special ed funding. And again, at a time when the state has the revenue and the legislature has not been fulfilling its obligation on the special ed funding, you know, to most of us, that was a no-brainer. Yes, we should fund special ed because then that allows your local school districts to free up more money to hire more teachers, get the supplies they need, but this legislature wouldn't do it. And again, like I said, to me, you know, those are two areas that when you talk about the effect on regular people, those two areas have a profound effect, and the legislature totally failed our people.
So, like you said, the unfortunate part is that when these bills pass, or at the point of them being passed, it is the politician or whoever is in office is thought of more than the community. And who benefits the most are the voters. And it's important that you think down the line because no one anticipates a war. No one anticipates a pandemic.
Right.
No one anticipates even the loss of a job. And so just sales tax being eliminated, even if you just look at your grocery bill right now, and you look at the tax alone, and then you compare that to the prices of gas right now, that money right now that could be in your pocket, that right now could be what gets the average person or determines whether or not the average person can get back and forth to work next week.
Absolutely.
And those are the things that matter. So like I said earlier, certain things are not partisan and they should not be partisan. And they should not happen contingent upon who's in office. When things work for the betterment of the community, then they absolutely should happen. Period. Full stop. And so, you know, I don't want to preach about that.
It's a good thing to hear, though, because if as public servants we're not there to help the people, why are we there?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, like you said, it was disheartening to hear that. I am glad that some things I would just say that I'm glad it was able to be passed, that there's able to be phased out because, you know, at this point, whatever money people can save, I'm glad that they're able to save. So at some point it will get down to zero. And I just want to make sure that people understand that the work is being done. And when will it go down? When will people start to see the effect of it?
Yeah.
Will that start in January as well?
It is, per the current legislation, it is slated to start in January. Now, my concern is that if Governor Kelly isn't reelected, will they revisit that bill? Because we got a little bit of a preview a couple of weeks ago at, on our final day in session. Somebody brought forward a bill that gives a huge tax cut to the wealthy and corporations. Kind of sound a little bit like the Brownback experiment. So part of me is very concerned that, again, if Governor Kelly doesn't win re-election, is that what we're looking at? A bill that instead of helping people who need it the most, gives tax breaks to the wealthy. So like I said, that's very concerning. And, you know, when you look at the way the legislature is made up right now, you know, you have 40 senators. Of those, 11 are Democrat. Then the rest are Republicans. Within the Republicans, you have some different factions. You have a few moderates, not very many. And then you have an extremist faction. Kind of looks the same way in the House as far as that breakdown. And so, like I said, the concern is that right now with some of these bad bills that pass out the legislature, the governor can veto them. And then it takes a 2/3 majority to override that.
Mhm.
And sometimes they can do that. Sometimes they can get those numbers, not always. But the scary thing is, if we don't have a governor there to veto these really bad bills,
Mhm.
all it takes is a simple majority for them to get across the finish line. And that's that's when we're fast tracking the collapse of schools, back to the Brownback experiment, those types of things.
Mhm.
Additionally, there was a bill, and we haven't talked about healthcare at all, but there were some horrifying bills that came through our healthcare committee this past session.
Right, that was
One of
next,
them,
so go ahead.
yeah,
Go ahead.
one of them would essentially do away with all vaccines for kids to attend school.
Mhm.
So it would grant an exemption. So if, you know, so you could have a class of incoming kindergartners, and normally, you have to have kids vaccinated for, those things that we've gotten rid of primarily, chicken pox, measles, those types of things. Well, this particular bill would basically grant exemptions for that. We already have a religious exemption, but this would be just basically full-blown exemption. That passed, and let me back up just a little bit. The majority of Kansans are very much in favor of those basic immunizations for kids to attend school. They're in
Mhm.
favor of all of those basic immunizations all the way through. I mean, I think it's like 87%, 90% of Kansans approve of them. That bill, though, to do away with them, passed out of our committee 5-3.
Mhm. And may I interrupt you right quick, and I'm gonna let you get back to that. When these bills are passed in reference to healthcare, are there any physicians consulted, or is there any scientific data used to push these bills one way or the other?
That's interesting you say that. And before I forget, I will mention that particular bill passed off the Senate floor. So it would have become, it could have become law with a different governor.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's a great question that you ask as far as, information that's provided and that type of thing. The system's rigged right
Mhm.
now as far as how everything is done in these committees. You would think that a person who understands healthcare would be in charge of the healthcare committee, but that's not how it is.
Mhm.
The majority leadership team picks who they want to chair these different committees. So interestingly, here in Kansas, in the House as well as the Senate, the people who are chairs of the healthcare committees oppose Medicaid expansion,
Mhm.
although most Kansans support it. So you have people placed in these positions that are basically in opposition to what it should be doing. Same thing with our education committees.
Mhm.
I mean, those are chaired by people who do not like public schools and have been working to tear them down. I mean, you see that all throughout the legislature on all the different committees. So in particular, like I'll talk about that bill that does away with childhood vaccines. Interestingly, I serve on the healthcare committee, and we were told there was going to be an information meeting on a particular bill. So we come in, for the meetings that I think it was on a Monday or Tuesday when the informational hearing, and the room was packed. And the room was packed with people who don't believe in science,
Mhm.
people who spend a lot of time with conspiracy theories, lots of time spent debating doctors and things online. So the room was packed with people who don't believe in science or fact.
Mhm.
So we're going through this whole process, and they're sharing their information. And then all of a sudden it was announced that this isn't an informational hearing, it's an actual hearing on the bill, and the bill number is given. And so then all of a sudden we're told, well, okay, at the end of the meeting, we're told, okay, tomorrow we'll hear from opponents. Okay. If you happen to be a doctor listening in, you would have known that the next day there was going to be a hearing opposing, basically scientific medicine. But who's listening into the legislature on most days? Especially, this was during the height of one of the COVID surges. So all of a sudden, then a number of us are like, oh my gosh, they're going to go forward with this information or with this hearing tomorrow on an actual bill that does some really bad things. So we started to alert people. And initially this bill was focusing, on ivermectin and some other areas that, like I said, were kind of concerning and anti-science. So, we're reaching out to people to let them know that there's a hearing. Well, here's the deal. Could doctors and scientists get to Topeka the next day with that short of notice? No. There's also a cutoff as far as submitting testimony. Could doctors and nurses and scientists get in testimony by 4:00 that day? No. So I think there were 3 pieces of testimony the next day. And it's like, well, and that was used against us. Well, this must not be that big of a deal because there's only 3 pieces of testimony from people saying, in opposition to the bill. And it's like, well, the people who supported the bill with the bad science had all kinds of notice. But the people who would have opposed it had less than 24 hours. And I do need to back up because this bill initially started out as being one that was brought forward by an individual who was under investigation by the Board of Healing Arts. He brought it forward to allow for ivermectin to be prescribed and filled by pharmacists. Well, they can already do that. We don't need a bill for that. But here's the thing. There was some secret language in there that people didn't realize initially that basically absolved him of his investigation. So, and then there was all this information about vaccines, and then this language to, again, allow an exemption for childhood vaccines was stuck into the bill later. So again, the process, as far as how it's supposed to work democratically, having hearings, the public gets notice, things are posted online for you as a voter to be able to access. That's not happening the way it's supposed to. And that should concern every citizen out there because, these things are just being railroaded through in Topeka. And again, like I said, that was used against us. Those of us who were trying to point out the science and the medical reasoning, we were told, well, there's only 3 pieces of opposition testimony, so it must not be a big deal. But it was a setup.
Interesting. So it's sounding like, well, first, so you know that so the audience knows that the Healing Arts is the Division of Healing Arts. That is the board that governs our license, our licensing. All of the doctors and physicians and chiropractors, everyone that we're called the Healing Arts community. And so, if you're under investigation, that means that something is a cause of concern in your conduct. And so, actually. Well, I don't know what happened, but I just find it quite interesting that they are even providing testimony for anything if they're up under investigation. This was an individual who said he was under investigation. He brought forward the bill saying he was under investigation for prescribing ivermectin. The Board of Healing Arts doesn't investigate people for prescribing ivermectin because that's already allowed. Off-label prescribing is already allowed. So that makes you wonder then really what he was under investigation for. No, but he must have left out a word because it would be or few words because you would have to be prescribing it incorrectly or
yes.
For whatever reason.
That is my guess.
About that. Yeah. But it's very interesting because it sounds like with what has happened is that you have teachers who are not involved with bills that involve the education process, and then you have doctors or physicians who are not involved with bills that concern healthcare.
Oh
And
yeah,
that
and
is
I
very,
think it's
very
interesting.
concerning to me.
One of the supporters who was brought in for one of these bad bills, he hadn't had, he hadn't had a practicing physician license in Kansas since I think the 90s. so,
So it isn't even a current license?
no, and but that was kind of par for the course as far as some of the people that were brought in as the quote expert testimony on some of these bills. And you know, and it wasn't just in the healthcare committee. I'm on Fed and State too, and you know, Wyandotte County spent 3 years developing a great plan, warm and welcoming. Gosh, I think I'm saying it wrong. Wyandotte County. They spent 3 years on that, putting that plan together. And then Derek Schmidt put together a bill and politicized the whole situation, brought in this horrible bill, and we heard it in Fed and State, same situation too, where opponents were given very little notice and information was not posted on the website appropriately for people to access. They came in, I made the motion to table the bill. And parliamentary procedure says, okay, when that type of a motion is made, a vote needs to be taken. Well, instead, the chair of the committee had the vice chair make a different motion to push it out of committee and pass it out favorably. So they didn't follow the procedure all the way around as far as allowing opponents to testify, as far as even just following the right procedure of how to run a meeting. And so a great bill, a great policy that Wyandotte County put together in 3 years, that committee basically destroyed in 30 minutes.
Right, that the people of Wyandotte County wanted, that community wanted for itself.
Yes.
Right. Those particular legislatures in Topeka, those who do not even live in Wyandotte County, destroyed a bill that the citizens of Wyandotte County decided that they wanted for themselves. They did away with. Yeah, I thought that was very interesting.
No, and it was a political bill all the way around that Derek Schmidt brought forward, hoping that he could use it against Governor Kelly. So by the time that bill made it to her desk, it had a veto-proof majority because, again, Republicans are the supermajority, and it's full, like I said, fully loaded with an extremist faction. So she really had no choices on that bill when it got to her desk.
Because either way, it would have gone in their favor.
Yep.
Right. Okay. Well, before we run out of time, there was some great conversation over the weekend concerning the current gun policies that we have, and definitely want to take a moment and send out condolences to the families, past and present, who have been victims of not only school shootings, but just the horrific shootings and victims of gun violence that have happened throughout all of the communities across the United States. But being that we are here, we want to take the time and talk about what we can do collectively and as a community to start the process of ending it here. Again, there's a lot of talk of what can happen in the U.S. Senate and what needs to happen on the Hill, as they say, but being that we are here and that our children are here and that this latest, well, I won't say the latest tragedy, because even just as yesterday, there's mass shootings that happened just in Philadelphia and other places. They weren't in schools, but can you just give us just some feedback on what happened with the events that took place, particularly on yesterday, and then also your solutions on ending gun violence, or how we can see as a community to address this healing as this issue, as well as bringing some healing to our community, even just along with what happened just right here in our small community with what happened at Olathe East. Because we are still even dealing with some parents here that are still going through some of that. So I'll let you speak so we don't run out of time.
Yeah, I actually did a forum 2 or 3 years ago on gun violence. And it was very well attended. A few individuals from the NRA showed up. And we all just talked. And here's the deal. And the same as yesterday, you find that, majority of people really do feel that there should be background checks. There should be some of these common measures in place. This movement is not about taking away guns from law-abiding citizens, not at all. We just want to make sure that, a kiddo who might, you have situations where kids have depression or they're struggling, you don't want a kiddo to get their hands on a gun in that type of situation. We have people who make viable threats out there against their partners. That's not a good time for them to have a gun. So we're talking about common sense measures. Red flag bill is one of those things that's in regard to domestic violence situations. I had 2 bills this past year. One of them was responsible storage. And the other one, as a result of the Olathe East shooting where my son attends, right after that happened, the district attorney basically said that, we need to do something about ghost guns. Ghost guns shouldn't be allowed. And just so people know, that's when people can order the parts or even kits online and assemble a gun at their home. So I had those 2 bills. Neither one was granted a hearing. Last year, I had a red flag bill. Wasn't granted a hearing. We got a little bit of a hearing this year on a different red flag bill, only because a deal was made between different people. But there was never a vote taken on it. They basically just let us have our say, I think is what it was. We'll let them have their say and that'll be it. But no hearings, no votes at all. And the fact of the matter is, the NRA, and it's not just them, there are these other far right organizations, KPI, ALEC, these other networks that control these legislators and basically fund their campaigns. So they know if they don't vote with these groups, there's going to be a payback for that. And sadly, so many of our legislators are only worried about their next election. I approach it that, any bill that comes my direction, I need to look at and think, okay, is this good for the people? That's where I got to operate, not will this hurt my next election? Is it good for the people? But that's not what we have in Topeka right now. And it's hurting us because, this legislature failed pretty much everybody this past session. If you're a person with a chronic healthcare condition, a medicinal cannabis could have helped you. They didn't let that go through this year. If you're poor and you need healthcare access, you're the working poor, and Medicaid expansion would help you. Wasn't any talk about that. We have a serious crisis out there with gun violence, and there are common sense solutions that could be implemented. No votes allowed on that. And like I said, there's just so many areas here where there are things that could have been done. Again, with the revenue where it is, just didn't happen because the focus isn't on the people.
Again, I know one of the things that we talked about yesterday was also addressing the issue of the gun culture that we have and putting money behind mental health and teaching our community, not only the children, but also adults as well, about conflict resolution and anger management, so that picking up a weapon is not the first, is not your go-to when you're angry. Or when you have an issue with something, is that you give people outlets and other alternatives and make access to mental health services more accessible, I would say, and make it easier and affordable, and then also addressing the stigma behind mental health as well, so that when you do seek out mental health services, that it is not seen as a weakness, especially if you are a male, and then that you are not put down for it.
Well, and I think, I'm, you know, I'm like a lot of people. I'm one car check away or, one broken car away from having a lot of things go wrong.
Right.
And sometimes when that happens, then, your car breaks down, then you can't go to that job interview or you can't go to work, and then you lose your job, and then you have another issue, and then somebody gets sick, and then you're in that downhill spiral. And, I think somebody made the point yesterday, instead of doing all these things to, quote, continue to harden our school, which isn't fixing the situation, how about livable wages? I mean, how about investing in other things? How about, yes, that, elimination of the food tax? Let's do those things which really help people and prevent that downward spiral. Because, I mean, at the heart of it, I know people say money can't buy happiness, but no, but if you can pay your bills, it does help out a lot.
Yeah.
It does help your outlook, and it helps prevent that downward spiral. So, like I said, I'm all about too, what else can we do for the people that just makes the overall situation better? But, and I know we're going to run out of time here real quick, and I want people to remember this. I know they get apathetic and think my vote doesn't matter. I kind of get that on the federal level because, this electoral college, you can vote and it doesn't really, go towards the overall count. But man, these local elections, your vote absolutely counts. Several years ago, the district that I live in was decided by 2 votes. 2 votes made a difference between having a rational person and a person that was very, very much on the fringe making decisions. 2 votes, that's you and your significant other, or, you and your brother, or whomever, that's the difference it makes. And again, state level is making all those decisions that affect your day to day. I mean, what a difference we could have made with a few more good people working for the people of the state instead of individually have that are working for all these dark money groups. So, there's some practical things people can do. There's a program called Voter to Voter. It's the fantasy football of voting. I encourage everybody to get on that. But then there's other things. Just tell your friends and neighbors to vote. Get them there. I always tell people, I got to have you and 10 more. What 10 people are you going to talk to and make sure that they get out and vote? Because right now we've got this group too of 18 to 34. They're the least likely to vote. But they got the most at stake. They got little kids, you're working, that type of thing. So we got to make sure that, the people, like I said, that have so much invested here, so much at stake in their future, are getting their voices counted. And that's going to be what's important this election coming up.
Absolutely. And I believe the local election will be on November 2nd this year. So again, we encourage everyone to exercise your right to vote, get out, know who the candidates are, know what their platforms are, and know what they stand on. And please get out and be active in your community and make a difference and educate yourself on what's going on so you can be a part of the process, because if you're not, then you're choosing to be a part of the problem. Thank you so much, Senator Holscher, for being a part of this great conversation. Again, like I said, it is a fluid conversation, one that is ongoing. Briefly, how can the community contact you if they have any further questions that they want to if they would like to contact you?
Yeah, no, you can reach me via Facebook, Twitter. I'm on those. My email address is C as in Cindy Holscher, HOLSCHER @gmail.com. I am happy to talk to anybody. And if you have questions about voting or how to get engaged or anything that we talked about, just shoot me an email, send me a message via social media. I am happy to help.
All right. Thank you so much. And again, you guys have a great day, and we will see you later. You have a good evening.